Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards podcast. I'm your host, Chris Browning. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this podcast, we plan to share these stories from bloggers to podcasters, writers, speakers, and more. Let's meet today's guest.
Hi, my name is Jen Smith. I am the host of the Frugal Friends Podcast and blogger behind modernfrugality.com. I have been co-hosting the podcast with my co-host Jill Siriani for just over a year. We do this because we really want to see people step into a frugality that's not restrictive, but that's freeing and really beneficial to their financial lives.
Today, I am talking with Jen Smith, host of the Frugal Friends Podcast and founder of Modern Frugality. Welcome to the show, Jen.
It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Oh, no, I'm happy to have you on here and to talk a little bit about what you're doing over there with Frugal Friends and more specifically about your community that you've developed there, because I think we all really strive to have an audience that cares about what we're doing and engages with us. And I know on the Frugal Friends podcast, you and your co-host Jill, you have an amazing audience. They really engage with you. You get show topics from them. You do a really fun segment called the Bill of the Week, where they actually call in with their favorite bill, whatever it may be. I think there was a duck bill one time.
We have a lot of gray bills.
You have a lot of great bills. And I think it's really cool that you are able to have people actually participate in what you're doing there. So what I want to know is I want to get some tips from you, some advice on, this community, how you developed it, where it came from, and really just to start it off, when you started your show, when you had the idea for your podcast, did you plan on having audience participation be a big part of what it is that you do?
That was always the hope. So the name of the podcast is Frugal Friends, and we really wanted to make a space where people who are trying to spend less money can come into community, because it can be really isolating. I know I went through a time, my husband and I paid off $78,000 of debt in 2 years. And so we didn't go out a lot. And so a lot of the friends that we had were still spending. They weren't in the same season that we were. I really took the feeling from that season in my life and wanted to create something for people in that season to feel included and heard and part of community.
I didn't have as much debt as you did, but we had some credit card debt as well right when we got married. And it is a really isolating feeling because you don't really want to just talk to random people about it. You don't want to just go to work and say, hey guys, got a bunch of credit card debt. How about you? You want to talk about this? It's not really something that comes up in normal conversation. And I think it is great that you created a space where people can come and kind of all know that we're all dealing with similar issues and be like, hey, it's cool. We can talk about this. We're all dealing with it, and it not be a big deal.
Yeah. It's not often things go the way that you plan or the way you want them to, but we really feel like this community has blossomed into what we dreamed it would.
Where did you start when it came to, building this community, this audience? What were your steps when you first started the show to kind of encourage this type of community to develop?
So we just started from day one with a Facebook group. Facebook is free. We thought it was the easiest place to get people to go, that most people would be there. Not everyone, but the vast majority are there. So we just started with a simple group and invited our friends that we thought would be interested in it. We promoted it on the show. So we would just drop hints like, if somebody said something interesting in the group, we would mention it. We mention people by name, and people love hearing their names. We would do that a lot. Then we would just be in there and be active. And if somebody posts something, we're right there responding. People know that that's where we are most accessible.
So you just made yourselves available. You made yourselves like, hey, this is, if you want to talk to us in person, I guess, more so than just hearing us or sending like an email, this is a place to come hang out.
Yep, that's exactly it.
I think that's a great point that you made about using names, because you're right. Like, I've called it a podcast and I listen to a ton of podcasts and I have my own podcast, but still, I get excited when I hear someone say my name. Like if I were to send in a message, it's like, oh, well, Chris sent in this message. And it's just, there's something about that. I guess it's exciting because to me, it's kind of like back in the day, if you were like to call into the radio station or I don't know if you can get your name read out on TV, but it's like the same feeling having someone call you out by name on a podcast.
Yeah. And it's like not just saying their name or saying that they were there, but like sharing a tip that they gave makes people feel so validated. And it leaves, we don't have to come up with as much because we're sourcing from our community. We don't have to rely on our own frugality to get through the whole show. Like we can take the ideas and experiences of our community and share those.
I wanted to ask you too, because for me, one of my issues always is organization and remembering these things. So if someone sends me a message, I'm like, oh, this is great. And then I'll forget just because, you go about your day and I lose track of these messages that I receive. So how do you keep track of the messages that you get and remember to like give these shout outs to people and, continue to include people and make them feel, a part of what you're doing?
We will plan our shows in advance. And if there's a topic where I feel like we really want to crowdsource some information, then I'll just put a post in the group and ask people for their tips. Or if we're having a guest and I want to come up with questions, I'll ask people if they have a question on a topic or something. And then when I go back to make the outline for the show, I go back to that post so I can get their direct quotes and their names and stuff.
Oh, that's smart. So I think that's one of the benefits of doing something like through like Facebook, for example, because you can have one post and then just all the comments are kind of just consolidated there under that post. So, we're back to go back and look.
Yes. And it's helpful like for later on because we'll have posts like questions or things that I've asked months ago. And you can tell people are searching for specific topics because I will get notifications that somebody has commented on something from like so long ago and brought it back to the top. But that just means it's an important subject. And so then everybody gets to see it and benefit from it.
Oh, okay. No, I love that. That's great. I was just thinking of the name of your show, Frugal Friends Podcast, thinking of like, friends, part of our normal lives. And how do you deal with balancing your friends, your family, the real life things you have to deal with, but then also making time to kind of engage and participate with the community? Just because, we all have this kind of like struggle of there's the work side of things, this creative side, and then there's just everything else we have to do. So to me, that's always a struggle. So, how have you found that to be?
So it's definitely a lot more work in the beginning. I would schedule posts to go up in the group, 3 or 4 per week, just to get conversations started. And then I would respond to everybody because that invites people to share their opinions too. Like if somebody asks a question and nobody's answering, then the conversation just goes stale. But if one person answers, it invites other people too. So I did a lot more of that when we were starting. Now we have over 700 members and I don't have as much of a responsibility too because, if somebody asks a question, there are people there answering it right off the bat. And then people asking their own questions too. If I feel something like really warrants a comment from me, or I want to like support somebody and like congratulate somebody for what they've done, like I'll be in there. But I'm in there I check it every day, but maybe I don't even post every day. Maybe I'm just like scrolling through and liking things. It depends. So it's a lot less work now than it was 6 months ago.
What would you say has been like the time change for you? Like, I know I wouldn't remember exactly how long, but, say like when you first started, how much time were you spending in there versus now when you kind of have like a community that's kind of growing and kind of feeding into itself?
So I would have spent like maybe an hour or so coming up with questions and stuff to schedule for a month. And then I would have been in there every day, or I had my notifications on every time something went up in the group. I was in there. And I was liking or commenting or whatever. So it wasn't a huge time commitment, but with anything with Facebook, you get inside and then you do what you're supposed to do and then you get distracted.
Yeah.
So I try to stay off Facebook as much as possible. But even when I was on there, it wasn't a huge time suck.
Okay. Have you found any other platforms useful for this, or is it you wanted to focus on Facebook because that's where the community kind of developed? That's where you put your initial efforts, and is it like too overwhelming to kind of branch out and do other ones, or what's been your experience with that?
We are actually exploring other options for platforms because Same with me. There are people that don't like to be on Facebook. So we're exploring Patreon as a like community platform that would offer some really more specialized, like one-on-one time with Jill and I, or just offer more. But we really haven't figured out what that would look like.
Got it. So just sticking with the platform, you know, it's working now, and while you kind of brainstorm and figure out where the next place.
Yeah.
Because that is the hard part, is getting people to migrate to a different platform. Because I'm sure the people who are on Facebook are there because they like Facebook. So that's always a struggle. It's like, okay, if we want to shift people, how many are going to come with us, and where's the best place? Because you still want to make it easy. You don't want to make it like a headache to have your community move around.
And as blatantly as we try and say that we are a podcast, there are still people that join the group that don't understand that this is a group for a podcast. Somebody asked the other day, she's like, besides Frugal Friends, what are some podcasts that you guys are listening to? Oh, no. Somebody just referenced to it as the pod, which I thought was like super cool. And then somebody commented, she's like, what podcast are you talking about? And I was like, the one in the profile picture and the banner picture and the announcement.
They just thought that was just, that's just a banner. That's not really a podcast.
And the one in the questions when you try to enter the group, like that says, did you subscribe to the podcast? So
I think it goes to show you that no one reads those questions.
Nobody. No. Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads me to the next question I had for you was, when we all start these projects and we have these plans in mind, sometimes they don't go the way we think they will. And there's some struggles, there's some issues that we have to deal with. Were there any issues or problems that you found when you started your group and kind of started to build this community for the podcast?
Mm-hmm. There's always some things that like don't go the way your picture perfect group would go. And you kind of just have to be like, if they're not blatantly self-promoting and trying to take over the group, you kind of just have to like let them go. I know there was one person that tried to make another group called Frugal Friends that used one of our episode pictures as their profile picture. And it was, blatant that they were trying to like steal our group members. But they had like 30 people and it wasn't growing. And you could clearly see like, if you were looking for our group, it was ours. So I kind of just like let that go. There's somebody in our group that posts all these very local free events in their area. And it's everything in me to keep from saying like, we don't all live in your city, darling.
Just hearing it's like next door. Got a local event going on.
Yeah. But she also she's really active and posts some other really great stuff that's like not hyper local. And so, and nobody, I don't know if people are bothered by the other stuff, but it's always some things that are like, if it's not blatantly against what you're trying to do, be flexible with it. And that will keep everybody feeling included.
Yeah, because I think that definitely is the struggle, because you don't want to shut anyone down to where they either like just stop talking altogether or they leave. But it's like a balance, because sometimes you're like, oh, that's kind of iffy. I don't know if I want that in there. But at the same time, it's like, well, they are participating and they're being a part of the community. And I really like your approach of, be a little lenient and then kind of see how it goes.
Yeah, because
if they step over.
Your most passionate supporters can turn into your most passionate 1-star reviews. So,
oh yeah,
just
that's very true.
Be flexible.
The last question I have for you, Jen, is now that you have this community that's growing and thriving and doing well, really, I think being a huge asset to your podcast, what do you hope that all of this will become? So, when you think about the future and you think about, down the road, X amount of years, what do you see this community being? How do you see that playing into the podcast? Like, what are your hopes for everything that you're doing?
We ideally would love to take it from the internet to the streets. We would love to have our community members meeting each other and creating local frugal communities, and also buying the products that we promote and are getting us sponsors. And, you don't like do this as a hobby to like lose all your money. We we only promote things that we really love. And so we hope that our audience sees that and trusts us with their money and the products that we promote. So those are kind of our two hopes.
Well, I think that's cool. I think that's always a great progression when you see a show go from being something that's an online thing to something that can become a real world event. And I think you are on a great start with your show, Frugal Friends, to have that going, because you can already see the passion that people have within the group, and you already see the connection that they have with you two as the hosts. And I definitely can see that becoming a real thing for you all. And I think that'd be really cool next, evolution of your audience and your group.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. Me too.
Well, thanks, Jen. I appreciate you sharing some information, some knowledge, and just kind of like your experience when it comes to developing a community and really fostering it and turning it into something that I think is beneficial for the people who are in it, but also it's really beneficial for your show too, because it kind of feeds back into it. It becomes this loop. They're sustaining the show, and you're kind of sustaining them as being a place to have this community. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going on. And for everyone else listening, if they want to see what you're doing and get an example for themselves of how you're running the show and kind of integrating it with the community that you built on Facebook, where is the best place for them to go check it out?
If you want to see the Facebook group and join it, we are at frugalfriendspodcast.com/group, and that'll take you to the Facebook group. Also, you can search Frugal Friends Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to get the summaries of each episode emailed to you every Frugal Friends Friday, you can head to my website, modernfrugality.com, and join the email list.
I appreciate you all joining us here for another episode. And next week, Miranda Marquette will be taking over hosting duties, as she is joined by Jim Wang from walletHacks.com. So make sure you are subscribed, so that way you can catch that episode and more from the Plutus Awards podcast. You can learn more about our guests and the Plutus Awards podcast at plutusawards.com/podcast and on Instagram at Plutus Awards. Again, thanks so much for joining us, and remember to keep creating.